In a crowded elevator at the International Studies Conference in 2018, a female passenger near the control panel asked for floor requests.
Ladies' lingerie.
A male passenger called out, rousing laughter from some of the other passengers. While the man thought it was a harmless joke, one of the women considered it to be harassment. Suffice it to say that there was an unmet demand for an apology and lawyers got involved. While responses were varied, many felt the complainant's reaction went too far. Ruth Marcus wrote for the Washington Post, "For goodness sake, let's maintain some sense of proportion and civility as we figure out how to pick our way through the minefield of modern gender relations. Not every comment that offends was intended that way, and intent matters." While condemning speech that's demeaning or offensive makes perfect sense in principle, what happens if what falls into those categories becomes too broad? It turns out that when applied widely, these social penalties create a range of problems. One of those problems is pushing people to extremes. For instance, if I'm told that what I'm saying is bad and wrong, or even stronger, that I'm a bad and wrong person, or even racist for saying it, those social costs make it very hard for me to say what I think. This makes sense for transgressions that most of us agree are offensive, like racial epithets or comments like, "You're smart for a member of Group X." But the question on the table now is, what if that becomes too broad? When the cost of expressing unpopular opinions is high, the only people willing to express those views out loud are those who either don't care about the social penalties or who are willing to pay the price. And those tend to be people whose views are more extreme. Yet if I've been told I'm a bad and wrong person for my opinion or viewpoint, I might seek out those more extreme folks simply because they don't judge me harshly. And over time, I might take their more radical views as my own. The flip side of that is that the wider we keep the range of what can be said without penalty, the more likely it is that someone is going to feel offended. So how do we keep the social penalties to a minimum and also recognize that we have a moral obligation to take people's feelings of being offended seriously? Let's think through the extreme. If the range of what can be said is limited to expressions that offend no one, nobody will be able to say anything at all. Although not saying anything might also upset someone, so that probably won't work either. We have to recognize that sometimes people are going to be offended by things that other people say. This means that we can't use offense to determine whether an idea or opinion deserves a social penalty. This is all the more true given that sensitivity varies widely and seems to have increased in recent years. Consider this. In an article for The Atlantic magazine in 2017, Peter Beinart wrote, "In 2008, the Democratic platform called undocumented immigrants our neighbors. But it also warned, we cannot continue to allow people to enter the United States undetected, undocumented, and unchecked," adding that those who enter our country's borders illegally and those who employ them disrespect the rule of the law. By 2016, such language was gone. Presumably, the language was removed because at some point during the intervening 8 years, it had been deemed objectionable. In the current moment, some consider an argument in favor of border restrictions to be inherently xenophobic or racist. That means that discussions over immigration policy cease to be simple disagreements. Instead, one position is morally right and one is morally wrong. And once moral virtue is at stake, what might otherwise be a simple difference of opinion becomes a whole lot more. Consider actor Scarlett Johansson's 2019 comment 1 year after she was pressured to step down from playing a transgender character because she is not trans. She said, "You know, as an actor, I should be allowed to play any person or any tree or any animal because that is my job and the requirements of my job." Accusations that Johansson was trivializing the oppression of trans people came quickly. Only trans actors should play trans people, the thinking went. While we probably don't need to worry about the career prospects of a famous actor, is there a way for a non-celebrity to make that comment and not be vilified? If our goals are better communication, less polarization, and fewer extreme positions, the answer to that question needs to be yes. There are reasons why this problem is particularly difficult to solve, and one of the major ones is that we can't see someone else's intentions. So we're left to draw conclusions on our own. Those conclusions are in turn shaped by our filter or worldview. In another video, we raised the question, what percent of adult white Americans do you think are racist? How might different answers to that question shape how someone responds to the immigration example? People who put the percent high are far more likely than those who put the percent low to say that an argument advocating for immigration restrictions is itself racist. Let's apply this thinking to affirmative action. If all that's known is that someone is opposed to affirmative action, there's no way to tell why that person is taking that position. They could be doing it because they're driven by true racial animus. They could feel hostility, animosity, or resentment toward the minority groups who stand to benefit from the policy. They could also oppose affirmative action because of a principled view that it's not a pathway to improving the well-being of members of minority groups. There can be little question that people motivated by racial animus are almost certainly opposed to affirmative action. But that doesn't mean that all people opposed to affirmative action are motivated by racial animus. Making this even more complicated is the fact that if someone is indeed driven by hate, their incentive is to avoid letting anyone know that, because motivation by racial hatred is a case where the vast majority of people agree there should be a severe social penalty, and rightly so. This creates a messy situation, and the right answer isn't always clear. In some cases, we have other objective evidence, either positive or negative, about the character of the person who said the offensive thing. When we have such information, we should certainly take it into account. But too often, the response to problems of unclear boundaries and unknown intentions is the conclusion that the person's intent is bad. In the affirmative action example, that means assuming that their motivation is racial animus and not their principles. However, well-intentioned people don't like being treated as though their intentions are bad or being told that intentions don't matter. This assumption of bad intent has serious costs. It works in direct opposition to a climate of open communication and general problem solving. Fostering that climate requires limiting the opinions and ideas that have social penalties tied to them to ones that almost all of us can agree are offensive. The way forward is to shift the baseline assumption away from one of bad intentions and towards one of open-mindedness and charitability.